Halloween, by Robert Burns. Footnote: Halloween is thought to be a night when witches, devils, and other mischief-making beings are abroad on their baneful midnight errands, particularly those aerial people, the fairies, are said on that night to hold a grand anniversary. End of footnote. Upon that night, when fairies light on Cassilis Downan's dance, or over the lays, in splendid blaze, on sprightly horses prance, or for Colion the rood is taken, beneath the moon's pale beams, there up the cove to stray and rove, among the rocks and streams, to sport that night, among the bonny winding banks, where the river Doon runs clear, where Bruce once ruled the martial ranks, and shook his carrack spear. Some merry, friendly, country folks together did convene, to burn their nuts, and pile their shocks of wheat, and have their Halloween full of fun that night. The lasses' feet, and cleanly neat, more strong than when they're fine, their faces happy, full sweetly show, hearts faithful, warm, and kind. The lads say true, with love knots well knotted on their garters, some surprisingly shy, and some with chatter, cause the girls' hearts to get startin' whiles fast at night. Then, first and foremost, through the cabbage, their stalks of wheat are sawed at once. They touch their own, and grasp and choose for very strong and straight ones. Poor fellow will fell off the drift, and wandered through the cabbage, and pulled, for want o' better shift, a cabbage like a pig's tail, so bent that night. Then, straight or crooked, earth or none, they roar and cry all throughout there. The very little children, toddling, run, with stalks out over their shoulders. And if the custard's sweet or sour, with pocket knives they taste them. Thereafter cozily, about the door, with clever care, they've placed them, to lie that night. The girls steal away from among them all, to pull their stalks of corn. But Rab slips out, and plays about behind the very large thorn. He grabbed onto Nellie hard and fast. Loud screamed all the other girls, but the grain at the top of her stalk was lost when cuddling in the haystacks with him that night. The old gidwife's well-hoarded nuts are round and round divided, and many lads' and lasses' fates are there that night decided. Some kindle cozily, side by side, and burn together trimly. Some start away, with saucy pride, and jump out over the chimney, full high that night. Jean slips in between with careful eye. What it was she wouldn't tell. But this is Jock, and this is me, she says into herself. He drunk over her, and she over him, as they would never more part. Till, puff, he started up the hide and seek, and Jean had a sore heart to see tea that night. Poor Willie, with his little cabbage, was stuck with prudish Mally, and Mally, no doubt, thought it rude to be thought a match for Willie. Moll's nut leaped out with prideful fling, and her own fitted, impertinent, while Willie laughed and swore by Jing, 'twas just the way he wanted to be that night. Nell had the haystacks in her mind. She puts herself and Rob in loving bliss they sweetly join, till white in ashes they're sobbing. Nell's heart was dancing at the view. She whispered Rob to look for it. Rob, stealthily, apprised her bonny mouth, full cozy in the nook for it, unseen that night. But Ran sat behind their backs, her thoughts on Andrew Bell. She leaves them chattering at their tails, and slips out by herself. She through the yard the nearest takes, and to the fire goes then, and in the dark grabbed for the box, and in the blue spell throws then, right afraid that night. And yes, she won it, and yes, she swore. It was what she made, no joking. Till something held within the pot. Good Lord. But she was quaking. But whether it was the devil himself, or whether it was a shadow, or whether it was Andrew Bell, she did not wait on talking to ask that night. Small Jenny to her granny says, "Will ye go with me, granny? I'll eat the apple at the glass. I'll get free of Uncle Johnny." She puffed her pipe with such a column of smoke. In anger she was so vaporing. She noticed it not, and cinder burned her fine new worsted apron out through that night. You little scolding woman's face. I dare you try such sporting as seek the foul thief any place, for him to spy your fortune. No doubt but you may get a sight great 'cause you have to fear it. For many a one has gotten a fright, and lived and died delirious on such a night. One harvest before the Sharamore. I remember it as well as last night. I was a young girl then, I'm sure. I was not past 15. The summer had been cold and wet, and stuff was very green. And yes, a merry harvest home we got. And just on Halloween it fell that night. Our chief reaper was Rob McGreen, a clever sturdy fellow. His son got Ippy Sim with child that lived in Auchmacalla. He got hemp seed, I remember it well, and he made little fuss of it. But many a day was by himself. He was so sorely fright that very night. Then up got Fectin Jamie Fleck, and he swore by his conscience that he could sow hemp seed a peck, for it was all but nonsense. The old Gidman reached down the bag and out a handful gave him, then asked him slip from among the folk some time when no one would see him, and try it that night. He marches through among the stacks, though he was something frightened. The dung fork he for a weapon takes, and hurls it at the buttocks of his horse. And every now and then he says, "Hemp seed, I saw thee, and her that is to be my lass. Come after me, and draw thee as fast this night." He whistled up Lord Lennox March to keep his courage cheery, although his hair began to stand on end. He was so scared and eerie, till presently he hears a squeak, and then a groan and grunting. He over his shoulder gave a peek, and tumbled with a stagger out over that night. He roared a horrid murder shout in dreadful desperation, and young and old came running out to hear the sad narration. He swore it was hobbled Jean McCraw, or hunchbacked Maran Humphrey. Till, stop, she trotted through them. And what was it but a pig astir that night? Meg gladly would to the barn have gone to win 3 measures of nothing, but for to meet the devil her alone she put but little faith in. She gives the herd boy a little nuts and 2 red-cheeked apples to watch while for the barn she sets, in hopes to see Tam Kipples that very night. She turns the key with quiet twist, and over the threshold ventures. But first on Sandy gives a call. The boldly in she enters. A rat rattled up the wall, and she cried, "Lord, preserve her!" and ran through gutter at the bottom of the dung hole, and prayed with zeal and fervor full fast that night. They hoisted out Will with strong advice. They promised him some fine handsome one. It chanced the stack he fathomed 3 times was timber-propped for twizzeting. He takes a twisted, old moss oak for some black gruesome witch, and let a curse, and drew a stroke, till skin in shreds came trailing off his fists that night. A wanton widow Lizzie was as cheerful as a kitten. But oh, that night among the woods she got a fearful settling. She through the furs and by the grave, and over the hill goes careering, where three lords' lands met at a rivulet, to dip her left shirt sleeve in, was bent that night. While over a waterfall the river plays, as through the glen it meandered, while round a jutting rock it strays, while in an eddy it dimpled, while glittered to the nightly rays, with bickering, dancing dazzle, while hidden underneath the slope of a hill, below the spreading hazel, unseen that night, among the brackens on the slope, between her and the moon, the devil, or else an unhoused cow, got up and gave a moo. Poor Lizzie's heart most leap out of her chest. Near lark height she jumped, but missed a foot, and in the pool, out over the ears she falls in, with a plunge that night. In order, on the clean hearthstone, the porringers three are ranged, and every time great care is taken to see them duly changed. Old Uncle John wanted wedlock joys, since Mars year 1715 did desire, because he got the empty dish 3 times. He heaved them on the fire, in anger that night. With merry songs and friendly tales, I know they didn't weary, and many tales and funny jokes. Their sports were cheap and cheery, till buttered scones with fragrant steam set all their mouths a-stirring. Then, with a social glass of liquor, they parted off careering, full happy that night.